March 7th, 1944, Normandy, France. A cold mist blankets the rolling hills, shrouding the landscape in an eerie silence. The distant rumble of artillery echoes through the air, punctuated by the sporadic crackle of gunfire. Among the chaos of war, a solitary figure stands resolute in a small, dimly lit farmhouse. The scent of damp wood and earth clings to her. Marguerite Dubois, a 62-year-old grandmother, is not a soldier, but a keen observer, her sharp blue eyes flickering with determination. Every day she watches the German tank movements from her window, noting the patterns, the timing. Marguerite has lived through the occupation, her heart heavy with the loss of loved ones, yet her spirit remains unbroken. She scribbles notes in a tattered notebook, a testament to her fierce desire to protect the men fighting for her homeland. As she meticulously records each detail, a flicker of hope ignites within her. If only they knew what I see, she thinks, her mind racing with possibilities. The local resistance dismisses her warnings as the ramblings of an old woman, but she knows the truth. This knowledge could turn the tide. Suddenly, the ground shakes as a nearby explosion rocks the farmhouse, sending dust flying through the air. Marguerite clenches her notebook tightly, resolute. Her heart pounds, racing against time. What she didn't know was that this idea would change the war. If stories like this fascinate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and comment below. March 7th, 1944. Normandy, France. The war has unfolded with relentless brutality, claiming countless lives and reshaping landscapes. As Allied forces prepare for D-Day, the stakes are higher than ever. The German military, entrenched and fortified, boasts the formidable Panzer divisions, armored tanks that have wreaked havoc across Europe, known for their speed, power, and strategic superiority. These tanks are not just machines. They are symbols of oppression, a constant reminder of the enemy's dominance. The statistics are staggering. In the previous year, the Allies suffered more than 200,000 casualties in the Normandy campaign alone. An overwhelming toll of human life that weighs heavily on the hearts of the soldiers and civilians alike. Each number represents a son, a father, a brother lost to the horrors of war. As the need for strategic advantage intensifies, military leaders are desperate for solutions. The Allies are outmatched in many respects, and the specter of defeat looms like a shadow over their operations. At the heart of the conflict lies a vexing problem: the inability to predict and counter the German tank formations. Previous attempts to gather intelligence have yielded little success. Reconnaissance missions often return with scant information, and reports are often contradictory. Nothing worked, experts lament, their voices tinged with frustration. The enemy's movements are erratic, their formations tightly guarded, leading to a consensus of impossibility. The experts agree. It couldn't be done. Inside the darkened rooms of military strategy, maps are strewn across tables, marked with lines of advance and retreat. Generals flip through reports, each page revealing another failure to breach the veil of German strategies. Intelligence officers pore over photographs, searching for a hint, a clue that could turn the tide of battle. The air buzzes with tension as each officer grapples with the reality that their efforts are futile. Every attempt to infiltrate enemy lines and gather vital information has been met with obstacles: tight security, fierce resistance, and the ever-watchful eye of German scouts. A notable failure was the Operation Overlord reconnaissance missions in early 1943. Intelligence units deployed aerial surveillance, yet the German forces adapted swiftly, camouflaging their positions and employing countermeasures. Reports from the front lines echoed a familiar refrain: "We have no idea where the tanks will strike next." As a result, the Allies faced unexpected ambushes, losing vital resources and morale. The British War Office, in a state of disarray, scrambles to devise solutions. They discuss the deployment of specialized units and even consider the use of new technology, such as radio communications, to track movements. However, the bureaucratic machinery grinds slowly, and by the time any proposals reach the front lines, the situation has changed. A sharp chill fills the air, and the threat of failure looms large. The generals sit in their rigid ranks, aware of the lives hanging in the balance, their every decision fraught with anxiety. Amid the panic, something remarkable begins to happen. An unexpected figure emerges from the shadows of war. Marguerite Dubois, a simple woman with a keen eye, finds herself uniquely poised to offer an unorthodox solution. Her observant nature, honed through years of watching the world from her farmhouse window, grants her insights that have eluded the most seasoned military minds. She notices patterns in the movements of the German tanks, their timings, their routes. But Marguerite is just one woman, armed with nothing but her observations and a brush of intuition. Could her insights ever influence the course of a battle? How could a grandmother, a civilian, possibly stand against the established military machine? A voice in her head whispers doubt, but another, the voice of her resilience, urges her forward. The weight of history presses down on her shoulders, and she feels the burden of all those lives at stake. Yet the military establishment remains shackled in its rigid ways, unable to comprehend that an unassuming observer may possess the key to victory. As Marguerite grapples with her newfound resolve, she recalls the faces of the soldiers, the mothers and fathers waiting for news, the children who have lost so much. Her heart aches with the knowledge that despite the odds stacked against her, she cannot remain silent. As she gathers her thoughts, Marguerite envisions a world where her observations could transform the battlefield. She contemplates the messages of the past, the stories of courage and ingenuity that have shaped history. She remembers her own grandmother, who once sought to protect her family from the ravages of war. If she could just share what she has learned, could it make a difference? Still, she feels the weight of doubt. Who would listen to a grandmother, she wonders. The generals would likely dismiss her as a mere onlooker, a relic of a time long past. But the fear of failure is eclipsed by a glimmer of hope, a desire to protect those who serve. In the shadows of her farmhouse, Marguerite makes a silent vow. She will find a way to convey her insights. If she can just break through the barriers of skepticism, if she can just be heard, what she doesn't know is that this idea will change the war. The mist thickens outside, cloaking the world in a shroud of uncertainty, but within Marguerite, a fire ignites. She resolves to embrace her role as an unexpected hero. With every tank that rolls by, she steels herself for the challenge ahead. If stories like this fascinate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and comment below. March 8, 1944. A small village on the outskirts of Normandy, France. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke from burning debris. A chill clung to the bones of those who dared to venture outside in the early morning light. Huddled in a modest stone cottage, a grandmother peered through the cracked window, her eyes narrowing against the light. Her name was Émilie Boucher, a woman of 70 years, known in her village for her unwavering spirit and deep love for her family. Émilie had lived through the ravages of 2 wars, losing loved ones to the relentless tide of conflict. Her fingers, gnarled but nimble, deftly knitted woolen socks as she listened to the distant rumble of German tanks. Each thunderous sound sent tremors through her heart, echoing the destruction that had become a daily reality. But it wasn't just the fear of war that consumed her. It was the sorrow of seeing the young men of her village march off to fight, many of whom would never return. One evening, while preparing a meager dinner of potato stew, Emily caught a glimpse of a group of soldiers practicing maneuvers in the field beyond her home. She watched, fascinated, as they directed their armored vehicles with precision, the metal beasts gliding like shadows across the terrain. Her husband, a former infantryman, had always spoken of the importance of understanding the enemy's movements. "Know your foe, Emily," he would say, his voice a ghost in her memory. Suddenly an idea sparked in her mind, an idea so outrageous and bold that it sent a shiver down her spine. "They underestimate us," she muttered to herself, her heart racing. "If only someone would listen." The following day, Emily set out for the village square, where the remnants of the resistance met in hushed tones, plotting their next move against the German forces. She approached a group of young men, her voice steady but urgent. "I've seen their movements," she insisted, her eyes wide with a mix of determination and fear. "The tanks, they have a pattern. We can use it against them." One of the men, a wiry figure named Pierre, laughed dismissively. "A grandmother? What can you possibly know about tanks?" His friends joined in, their laughter ringing harshly in the cool air. Emily's heart sank. She had expected skepticism, yet their derision stung deeper than she had anticipated. But Emily was undeterred. Later that night, she sat at her rickety wooden table, surrounded by scraps of paper and a map of the village. She traced the routes she had observed, the formations, the timing of the movements. Hours turned into days, and soon her cottage was filled with diagrams and notes, a chaotic tapestry of information woven together by a fierce resolve. On March 15th, Emily summoned the courage to return to the resistance meeting. This time her voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "I have a plan," she declared, holding up her meticulously drawn maps. "I know how we can surprise them." The room fell silent, doubt hanging thick in the air. Pierre crossed his arms, skepticism etched on his face. "And what makes you think they'd even care about what an old woman has to say?" "I know their movements, better than any of you," she shot back, her voice trembling yet fierce. "I've watched them day after day. They follow patterns. If we can anticipate them, we can save lives." There was a pause, tension thickening the air. Then a voice from the back spoke up. "What if she's right?" It was Paul, a young soldier with eyes that had seen too much for his age. "We could at least try her plan." The murmurs of agreement began to grow, but the skepticism lingered. Emily's heart raced as she felt the tide shifting slightly in her favor. With every ounce of her being, she pressed on, detailing her observations, her voice filled with passion and conviction. Days passed, tension palpable as the Allies prepared for D-Day. The village buzzed with a mix of fear and determination. Emily found herself increasingly at the center of the resistance discussions, her maps becoming vital to their strategy. She collaborated closely with Paul, who became not just an ally, but a companion in this unexpected journey. Together, they spent late nights studying the movements of the German forces, her insights igniting hope in the hearts of the young men who had once laughed at her. Yet doubt continued to gnaw at Emily. "What if I'm wrong?" she thought late one night, staring at the dim glow of the lantern. "What if my predictions lead them into a trap?" The fear of failure haunted her, but she drowned it in the memory of the faces of the young men who had not yet returned home. Inspired by love and loss, she steadied her resolve. Finally, on March 29th, the day of the operation arrived. Emily stood at the edge of the village, the cold wind whipping through her hair as she surveyed the landscape. The sound of engines roared in the distance, a grim reminder of the impending battle. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of anxiety and hope. She could hear the murmurs of the soldiers as they prepped for the mission, but she felt a sense of purpose wash over her. "Emily," Paul called, rushing to her side. "You ready?" "I am," she responded, her voice steadier than she felt. Inside, she battled with her fears, but a fierce determination bubbled to the surface. "Remember, they'll move in a line. We have to anticipate their path." As the troops advanced, Emily's instincts kicked in. She watched intently, each movement of the German tanks now stark and clear in her mind. "Now, move left!" she shouted, pointing urgently. The soldiers followed her guidance, their actions driven by faith in her observations. The first explosion echoed through the valley as the Allies engaged the enemy. Emily held her breath, heart racing. The tanks were falling, one by one, as they crashed into the traps set by the resistance. The thrill of victory surged through her, but it was short-lived amidst the chaos of war. With each passing moment, Emily's heart ached for those young soldiers risking their lives on the battlefield. She prayed silently for their safety, her thoughts a cacophony of love and fear. "Please let them come back to me," she whispered, glancing at Paul, who fought fiercely beside her. What she didn't know was that this idea would change the war. The German tanks, once feared, were now vulnerable, their dominance shattered by the insights of a grandmother who dared to dream against the odds. As the dust began to settle, Emily stood in disbelief. They had succeeded. 900 paratroopers were saved, lives preserved through her unwavering courage and determination. The laughter that had once mocked her now echoed in cheers of triumph. She had become an unexpected hero, a symbol of resilience and hope in a world torn apart by war. And as she looked at the faces around her, she knew this was just the beginning. March 12, 1944, the outskirts of Normandy. Gray clouds hung low in the sky as Emily Boucher stepped out of her cottage, the chill biting her skin. The war had drained the land of color, but her spirit flickered with a fierce intensity. She held tightly to a crumpled map, her mind swirling with ideas that seemed absurd to many. Today, however, she would put her thoughts to the test. As she approached the village square, Emily found a familiar face, the local mechanic Jean. Broad-shouldered and rough around the edges, he was the kind of man who had survived the worst of the war with a stubborn will. "You shouldn't be out here, Emily. It's too dangerous," he cautioned, his voice laced with concern. "I know the tanks are coming, Jean. I can hear them in my dreams," she replied, her voice resolute. "But I believe I have a way to help. I need your skills." Intrigued, Jean raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" As Emily shared her revolutionary plan to use the terrain and her knowledge of enemy movements, a flicker of doubt crossed Jean's face. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," he scoffed. "But if you're serious, I'll help. This is war. We need every advantage we can get." The following days were a blur of activity. Emily and Jean set up a makeshift workshop in the back of the mechanic's shop, the scent of oil mingling with the earthy aroma of the village. They gathered scraps of metal and old tools, transforming them into instruments of hope. With each clang of metal, Emily's heart raced, her vision of saving the paratroopers growing clearer. As they worked, Emily's mind was a whirlpool of memories, each one a drop of resolve. She recalled watching German tanks crush her village in the previous war, the helplessness that had washed over her. But this time, she would not stand by. This time, she would fight in her way. "Just one test," she whispered to herself, her hands trembling with anticipation. "If it works, we could save them." On the morning of March 16th, Emily and Jean gathered a small group of local farmers and resistance fighters, sharing the details of their plan. "We need to lure them into the fields where they'll be vulnerable," Emily explained, gesturing over the old war map spread before them. I know their movements and I'll guide you. Isn't this too risky? One of the farmers questioned, his brow furrowed with worry. Risk is the only way we'll reclaim our land, Jean replied fiercely. We've lost too much already. We can't lose more. With the plan set, they spent the next day preparing for the test, the air thick with tension and unspoken fears. Emily's heart thudded in her chest as she positioned makeshift decoys in the fields, wooden figures draped in tattered cloth. They won't see what's coming, she murmured, her eyes glinting with determination. Dawn broke on March 17th, the sky painted in muted shades of gray. Emily stood at the edge of the field, a cold breeze brushing against her cheek. She could hear the distant rumble of tank engines, growing louder with every second. Now or never, she breathed, a mix of dread and excitement coursing through her veins. As the first German tank crested the hill, Emily's heart raced. She waved her arms, a signal to Jean and the others hidden in the shadows. Now! Move them into position, she shouted, her voice cutting through the chill. Under Emily's guidance, the farmers maneuvered, positioning the decoys with precision. The tanks barreled forward, drawn to the illusion of movement. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she watched them approach, her heart echoing her fears. Then, the first explosion shattered the morning calm, a resounding roar that echoed through the valley. Emily's stomach dropped as she witnessed the impact of their plan. The tank had triggered a hidden mine, immobilizing it in an instant. It worked, she gasped, astonishment and relief mingling within her. But the fight was far from over. The remaining tanks quickly adjusted, searching for the source of the attack. Emily signaled to Jean, who rallied the men. We need to leverage this advantage. Follow her lead, he commanded, urgency etched on his face. With renewed vigor, Emily directed their movements, weaving between the fields and guiding them to set up more traps. Each successful detonation sent shockwaves of hope through the group. They were reclaiming their land, one blast at a time. After hours of tension-filled skirmishes, the last German tank retreated, smoke trailing behind it in the wake of their defeat. Emily's pulse raced, exhilaration flooding her veins. We did it! We actually did it! She exclaimed, her voice breaking with emotion. The farmers cheered, embracing one another in disbelief and joy. Jean grinned, pulling Emily into a tight hug. You were right, Madame Boucher. You really are a force to be reckoned with. As the dust settled, a profound sense of accomplishment enveloped Emily. They had turned their fear into action, proving that even the most improbable ideas could lead to victory. But we must spread the word, she insisted, her eyes sparkling with determination. If we can do this, we can do even more. If you're hooked on this story, hit that subscribe button, she urged, her smile contagious as they began to discuss their next steps. The battle was won, but the war was far from over, and Emily's heart swelled with purpose. She had taken the first step toward changing the tide. What she didn't know was that this was just the beginning of her legacy. March 24th, 1944. A dimly lit conference room at the Allied headquarters in London. The air buzzed with tension as generals and strategists pored over maps scattered across the polished oak table. The weight of the war pressed heavily on their shoulders. Emily Boucher stood at the entrance, clutching her notebook, her heart racing. She had come to make her case, a frail figure among the imposing military men. Madame Boucher, we'd appreciate your insights, but this is not the time for unconventional strategies, snapped General Thompson, a stern man with a deep furrow etched across his brow. The room fell silent, eyes flicking between him and Emily. I have information. Intelligence that could save lives, she said, her voice steady despite the quivering of her hands. I've memorized the German tank movements. I can predict their attacks. A skeptical murmur rippled through the room. Colonel Hughes, a tall man with a hawkish gaze, leaned forward. With all due respect, madame, what you suggest is absurd. We rely on intelligence reports and reconnaissance, not the musings of a local villager. Emily's chest tightened, but she pressed on. I witnessed them from my window. What I saw, the patterns, the timing. It can save the paratroopers. Experts agree. It cannot be done. General Thompson shot back, his voice unwavering. What you propose is simply not feasible. I have to disagree, gentlemen, came a new voice, richer and full of authority. Brigadier General Patton entered the room, his presence commanding. With a flick of his wrist, he gestured for silence. We're losing too many men in Normandy. If there's a chance her observations can provide us an advantage, then we must at least consider it. Emily's heart soared at the brigadier's unexpected support. I can show you, she said, her voice rising with newfound confidence. The next attack is imminent. I can prove it. General Thompson exchanged a glance with Colonel Hughes, skepticism still etched on his face. What's the plan? You expect us to prepare based on an elderly woman's claims? Patton's eyes glinted with determination. Let's give her a chance. Gather the men. We'll set up a test operation based on her predictions. If she's wrong, we can dismiss this whole endeavor. If she's right... He trailed off, the implications hanging heavily in the air. The tension shifted into a cautious anticipation. Emily felt her heart pulse with urgency. She knew time was of the essence. I can't guarantee success without the right resources. I need maps and a team to communicate with. Very well. Patton nodded, determination in his voice. We'll allocate resources. But Emily, you must be precise. Lives depend on your accuracy. Thank you, General, she whispered, feeling a blend of trepidation and hope. I won't let you down. As she left the room, Emily's mind raced, envisioning the task ahead. She was not just a grandmother. She was a beacon of potential in this dark time. If she could show them the truth of her observations, perhaps it could turn the tide against the enemy. Days turned into a blur of frantic preparations. Emily, along with a small team of soldiers who had come to believe in her vision, worked tirelessly. She pointed out the paths taken by the German tanks, the patterns that seemed to emerge with every passing day. The maps became littered with colored markers, each indicating a strategic position, each one a lifeline for the paratroopers. Then came the test, March 28, 1944. The air was thick with tension as Emily stood alongside the commanding officers, a mix of fear and determination swirling inside her. They'll strike at dawn, she whispered. I've seen it before. As the first light of day broke over the fields, the distant rumble of engines filled the air. Emily pressed her palm against the cool surface of the table, feeling the vibrations resonate through her. Soldiers moved into position, eyes trained on the horizon. The enemy tanks rolled into view, just as she predicted. Emily's heart raced. Now, engage, she shouted, her voice sharp and clear. The Allied troops opened fire, a symphony of gunfire erupting across the battlefield. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the world narrowing down to the chaos of war. Emily watched, her breath held tight, praying her instincts would guide them to victory. As the battle raged, reports flooded in. The enemy was caught off guard, their formations disrupted. The soldiers' morale surged as they saw their weapons strike true. Hours later, the dust settled, and the battlefield fell eerily silent. Losses reduced by 85%. A young lieutenant reported, shaking with adrenaline. We did it! We've turned the tide! Emily's heart swelled with a bittersweet joy. Lives had been saved, but the cost of war lingered like a shadow. The commanders erupted in cheers, but Emily stood off to the side, feeling the weight of each lost soldier. General Patton approached her, his eyes bright with a mix of pride and disbelief. "You've done it, Emily. You've changed the course of this operation." She nodded, a tear tracing down her cheek. "We did it together. Each life matters." "More than any of us could have imagined," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Your insights have proven invaluable. We need to ensure this strategy is implemented across all fronts." Emily felt the enormity of her contribution sinking in. She had transformed from a forgotten woman into a vital asset in the campaign. Yet the path ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. The war was far from over, and each day would present new challenges. As they left the meeting room, a sense of hope filled the air, mingling with the lingering scent of gunpowder and the distant echoes of battle. Emily realized that perhaps it was not just her knowledge of military strategy that had won the day, but her sheer resilience and belief in something greater than herself. In this moment she understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the resolve to act despite it. And as she looked into the eyes of her fellow soldiers, she knew she had sparked a flame of hope that would continue to burn, guiding them through the darkness of war. What impossible ideas do you think could change the world? Comment below. March 18th, 1944. A makeshift command center, hidden in the woods near the village of Émilie-Boucher. The walls were lined with maps, red circles marking strategic locations. The tension in the air was palpable. Hushed voices debated fervently. Generals and captains, all men of high rank, leaned over the table, their faces shadowed by the dim light of flickering oil lamps. Outside, the wind rattled the branches, echoing the uncertainty within. Emily stood on the threshold, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent years savoring the taste of war's bitterness, but now she bore the weight of an extraordinary revelation. She had committed to memory the complex German tank movements, a tactical treasure that could potentially save lives. Yet, she felt like a ghost among the living as the officers debated her fate. "I still say we can't trust a woman's observations," barked Colonel Harris, his voice gruff, dismissive. "We need concrete evidence, not fairy tales spun by an old lady." "Respectfully, sir," Captain Leclerc interjected, his eyes sharp. She witnessed the maneuvers firsthand. Her insight could mean the difference between victory and defeat. A heavy silence fell over the room as Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "I am not here to tell tales. I saw the tanks. I saw how they move." The officers exchanged looks, skepticism etched on their faces. General Fontaine, a man with a reputation for appreciating unconventional tactics, leaned back in his chair. "What you're saying is extraordinary, Madame Boucher. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof." Emily felt the weight of their doubt pressing down on her. "I can show you. I can guide your paratroopers through the enemy's defenses." Colonel Harris scoffed. "And how do you propose we test this? Send lives into danger based on the memory of a grandmother?" "Actually, that could be our best option," Leclerc countered, his eyes narrowing. "We could conduct a controlled exercise, simulate an attack based on her intel." The room erupted into a flurry of strategic discourse. Emily felt a flicker of hope, but it remained shadowed by the looming specter of doubt. The air crackled with tension, every word a knife edge. "Fine," Harris conceded, his voice heavy with reluctance. "We'll put her to the test. But if she fails, the blame will be on her. No second chances." The tension shifted, transforming from skepticism to a quiet determination. Emily's heart raced. "Thank you," she breathed, the words fighting to emerge past the knot in her throat. The plan was set. Over the following days, Emily worked closely with Captain Leclerc, mapping out routes and movements, weaving a tapestry of strategy from her memories. Every night she studied the tank formations, every movement replaying in her mind like a haunting melody. On March 25th, a day marked by uncertainty, Emily stood in the command center as the paratroopers assembled. They were young men, faces lined with fear and excitement. She felt an overwhelming tide of emotion, a mix of pride and dread. "Listen carefully," Emily instructed, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "The Germans will flank you here, and if you take this route, you will find cover." Her fingers traced the map, the ink-lined roads now imbued with purpose. "Why should we trust you?" one soldier called out, hesitation in his tone. "Because I've watched them," she replied, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "I've seen their patterns. You can survive this if you follow my lead." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the idle troops, Emily turned inward. Her thoughts raced, a chorus of fears and hopes battling for dominance. What if they didn't believe her? What if her memories failed her in the heat of battle? She brushed the thoughts aside, steeling her resolve. The following morning dawned bright but solemn. The air was heavy with anticipation. The paratroopers, armed and nervous, gathered at the edge of the forest. Emily stood beside Captain Leclerc, a mere mortal amidst heroes ready to face the unknown. "Stay sharp, follow the plan," he directed, his voice low but firm. Emily's heart raced as she watched the soldiers leap into the sky, their parachutes blooming like flowers against the blue expanse. She watched them land, their silhouettes stark against the backdrop of war. With each step, Emily paced, fingers crossed, heart in her throat. Then, as the paratroopers moved through the underbrush, her heart sank. The enemy was already there, tanks rolling ominously into view. Emily's mind raced back to the map she had drawn. "Now!" she shouted, her voice rising above the sudden chaos. "Move to the left!" The soldiers hesitated, torn between instinct and her urgent command. Then they followed, darting to cover as German shells erupted around them. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, each explosion a reminder of the stakes. "Keep going, stay low," she urged, praying they could hear her over the din of war. As the battle unfolded, Emily's heart sank and soared, the rhythm of fate dancing around her. The men moved as one cohesive unit, employing her strategies, outmaneuvering the enemy. One by one, the soldiers began reporting in, their voices crackling with exhilaration. "Losses reduced by 85%. We're turning the tide." The words resonated through the air like a sweet song. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. They were succeeding. Her heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. Days later, the officers reconvened in the command center, this time with an air of reverence. Colonel Harris, his demeanor softened by the reality of Emily's success, addressed the room. "We owe you an apology, Madame Boucher. Your intelligence saved lives." Emily, standing amid the weary men, felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "I only did what I could," she replied, humility threading her words. General Fontaine stepped forward, a slight smile breaking his stoic facade. "Your courage and insight have changed the course of this battle. We need more voices like yours." "Madame Boucher, you will be recognized in official reports," Leclerc added, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "You've proven that the battlefield is not solely the domain of men." As the men clapped her on the shoulder and exchanged congratulatory glances, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had stepped into the fray, her voice had been heard, and lives had been saved. The sun dipped low in the sky, and as she returned to her village, Emily carried with her not just the weight of her experiences, but the hope of countless others. In the days that followed, she returned to her cottage, the world outside still war-torn, but filled with a flicker of hope. The men she saved would go on to fight harder, to believe in the possibility of survival. Emily Boucher had not only validated her existence in the eyes of those who doubted her, she had rewritten her story, proving that even the smallest voice can echo through the annals of history. In the quiet of her home, she reflected on the journey. Every memory, every struggle, every soldier's life, all intertwined like vines in a forest, strong and resilient. Innovation doesn't need credentials. It needs courage. The words echoed in her heart, a mantra to live by. What impossible ideas do you think could change the world? Comment below. May 15th, 1945. The village of Saint-Côme-de-Fresnay in Normandy, France, felt a strange mix of relief and tension as the echoes of war began to fade. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the fields where once the sounds of gunfire and the cries of soldiers had filled the air. Emily Boucher sat on her porch, her weathered hands resting on her lap. A sense of peace enveloped her, yet her heart carried the weight of memories too heavy to share. In the months following the liberation, Emily became a symbol of resilience. Word of her extraordinary contribution, once whispered in hushed tones, now spread throughout the region. The paratroopers she had saved, led by Major Robert Caldwell, returned to pay her homage. They brought fresh flowers from the nearby hills, vibrant against the starkness of the cottage's stone facade. As they approached, Emily's eyes sparkled with a mixture of joy and humility. "Madame Boucher," Major Caldwell began, his voice steady but emotional, "we owe you our lives. You saved 900 of us with nothing but your courage and your mind." Emily's soft smile belied the ferocity of her spirit. "It was merely a matter of doing what needed to be done," she replied, her voice a whisper of strength. "You men were in